I don't normally do stuff like this, but lately I haven't been feeling like myself. The past couple days have really gotten me down, and I feel I needed me a bit of relief in that spirit. Now I can hear you tell me something like, well, why don't you take a break for a couple days and come back where you're all good and fine? To be frank, I can't really do that so much. As while this is a bit of a priority for me, I'd probably end up leaving a wide gap of lacking content for a while if I did so. And I don't think uploading gameplay has been doing me any favors lately. So that brings us to this episode of SpongeBob, entitled, Are You Happy Now? If you recall a while back, I stated how I was doing a video review series for Dailymotion as a means of avoiding YouTube's current copyright nonsense, which thankfully hasn't been an issue with the short I uploaded involving Monster Musume. Now the first question you probably have is, why can't I talk about this episode there? And my answer is that if I did that, I won't have much to work with when it comes to quips or jokes. And this episode really isn't one that is a joking matter, and it'd be really distasteful of me to do so. So let me state this firsthand. I know I'm probably going to get a lot of backlash for this, but I don't really think this episode is that bad. I mean, it's not as terrible as people make it out to be, but I can't say it's flawless by any stretch of the imagination. It's still a bit of a weak episode. But let's talk about it in greater detail. The premise is that SpongeBob tries to cheer Squidward up and give him his happiest memory, which in itself is a great idea for an episode, and I know there's plenty of potential in that regard. Now, I'm not going to talk about continuity here because I don't really have the time on me to do that right now. The only argument I'll make is to check episodes like Band Geeks, Love That Squid, or even flops like House Fancy. You'll probably understand why. Anyway, knowing SpongeBob to be the bright, chipper, and outgoing sponge he is, I can actually believe he would go out of his way to make Squidward's day his absolute best. Sure, there's been stuff like Boning Buddies or Choir Boys where he ultimately ended up bringing Squidward down, but I'm not going to let those episodes affect my view on this one. SpongeBob in this episode is really genuine, and I praise the effort he goes through just to make Squidward happy. As this episode goes on, he takes Squidward to an opera, an art museum, and on a balloon ride. But each one of these proved to be problematic, either by coincidence or inconvenience. Squidward gets hit in the eye during the opera, Fiasco comes in and burns down Squidward's statue in the museum, and Squidward gets afraid of heights during a balloon ride, resulting in an avalanche of sorts. None of these being SpongeBob's fault, by the way, which is kind of important. Now I want to talk about what really brings this episode down. Squidward has always been glum, deadpan, cynical, and the like, but in this episode, his depression is as serious as it could get, and as it goes on, we see how worse and worse he gets. And I think it'd be stating the obvious for me to say that it's all just really sad. This leads to the most infamous part of the episode, something that everyone likes to touch upon. 2 weeks pass, and Squidward is an absolute wreck. He shoves his hand in the oven, pulling out food that's been burned to a crisp. SpongeBob checks up on him, Squidward doesn't want to talk to him, then later we see he pulls a rope, throws it, and brings up a birdcage. So, did you miss it, guys? Yep, these are all blatant suicide jokes. Well, the second time was anyway. The first one I can see people missing the first time around. And honestly, feels like back to back, it's trying to keep you on the edge of your seat or something. It's like, hey, if it wasn't so effective the first time, let's make sure we let them know what's really going on this time around. Needless to say, it doesn't work here, and I'd like to take a minute to talk about these attempted suicide jokes. Now, there's this thing called dark humor, something that's a bit more risque in the field of entertainment, mostly in adult shows, where you'd expect this kind of stuff to be in. Now, shows like Aqua Teen Hunger Force can get away with it because, in essence, is that kind of series where black comedy wouldn't be out of place. Video Ouija, Juggalo, The Marines, hell, any episode where a character tries to off themselves. Similarly, SpongeBob has pulled stuff like this before, but it worked back then because of 2 key ingredients, subtlety and exaggeration. Remember Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 4? Squidward says how he wonders if a fall from that great a height would kill him. And in Band Geeks, he makes a comment saying how the drumsticks pushing him to the wall didn't kill him. You know, small stuff. Now, I know how sensitive the subject of suicide is, and I know it's something that should never be portrayed in media without any sort of tact. I mean, if you end up making something like Beyond Two Souls, Brian's a Bad Father, or in the case of this series, One Course Meal, you'll end up more often than not making something so distasteful and abysmal because of how poorly you treat the subject matter. Now, as I said, the gags here don't really work. A lot of people like to say how the jokes here are disturbing or completely wretched. Me? I think they're really unnecessary, and are just there to hammer in how depressed Squidward is, with the former scene being a bit more subtle and the latter being more on the nose. Not to mention it's all a bit out of place, even for a show like SpongeBob. Anyway, the episode ends when SpongeBob brings Squidward into the Krusty Krab, where he begins to chop up a bunch of papier-mâché SpongeBob, stating he's found his happiest memory. Now, as I said, this episode isn't the worst, but it's got its fair share of issues. For one, Squidward's depression shouldn't be as serious as they portrayed it here. And really, I like the premise alone. I really like it when the friend tries to cheer someone up who's going through a hard time, especially since I can relate in that regard, as well as anyone else going through some sort of sadness. But in terms of this episode, it just doesn't work out so well. Had they fixed it up and gave it a few tweaks here and there, it would have been a solid episode. But I digress. On the topic of my Daily Motion videos, join me next time where I talk about an episode of American Dragon. Hopefully I'll be in much better shape by then.